Do you have a tough challenge with your supply chain or logistics? Loguru is the intelligent partner that works globally with manufacturers, retailers, and logistics businesses. We help our customers define, buy, and safely implement solutions across the supply chain. If you want a more sustainable future for your supply chain, visit loguru.co.uk. Complete end-to-end satisfaction guaranteed.
Coming up in this episode.
We're up to just under 200 case studies now of people working across the industry in a whole variety of roles, talking about their jobs, what they like, don't like, real passion, working for all different companies, different modes, both sides of the buying and selling. It's those case studies we're using to create curiosity. If we can create curiosity, then things can come from that.
The Logistics Collective podcast is a series focused on the logistics industry, where there are many incredible stories to be told. We'll be speaking with those who've worked and are working within the industry today. What have been their experiences, good and bad, since joining, and would they recommend a career in the industry to others? Here's your host, Malcolm Pope.
Hello again, and welcome to our next episode in Logistics Collective, the podcast. And today I have with me, somebody I've known for a very long time, that used to work for a juggler, that has had an amazing career all the way up to C-suite, and now sits as president of something called Logistics UK, and is also a board member of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Phil Roe to the Logistics Collective. Nice to see you, Phil.
Yes, and you, Malcolm, and thank you for the kind introduction and great to see you again.
So tell us about your role, and could you explain to those that might not know what Logistics UK is all about?
Yeah, by all means. So Logistics UK is the largest trade association that represents people and organisations working all the way across the logistics sector in the UK and also in Ireland as well. People might remember the FTA, the Freight Transport Association, and actually Logistics UK grew out of the FTA as we broadened. We changed our name about 4 years ago now, just a little bit over actually. But what we do is we represent the industry. So uniquely, the organisation represents every mode that operates within the industry. It also represents buyers of logistics as well as operators of logistics, and seek to combine and consult to get really strong viewpoints to then influence all different forms of government. And a lot of that is in the DfT, but not all, because of course we've got a lot more devolved government across the UK. The organisation is also a services group, so it provides largely compliance services, consultancy and training across the road industry and also in the air industry as well. So it's a broad-based role. My role, I'm the non-exec chairperson of the board. I've been there as a non-exec director since 2017. And then was lucky enough to be to get this role 2 years ago when I left my corporate life behind me.
Well, it's sort of you moved to one side to become more influential. That's the way I would describe it, Phil.
Well, thank you for the career advice.
I wouldn't be so bold. So what is Logistics UK most interested in at the moment? Because I do watch everything quite closely in terms of what's happening within the industry. What's perspective from Logistics UK in terms of what's really capturing your attention at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting time for this, obviously, sitting where we are in the electoral cycle at the moment. But I think there's really some great opportunities for the UK economy by really working more closely with the logistics sector. And we've recently done a piece of work, again, in consultation with our members, looking at what those priorities need to be going forward and actually how we make the best of those opportunities for the UK. And there's probably four of those and then one overarching one, really. So the first is that the logistics infrastructure for the UK is a national asset. And I think that was recognised within the Future of Freight work that was done a couple of years ago now. But actually what we want to see is real change, recognition of that, that enables planning reform to actually deal more sympathetically in many respects with the logistics infrastructure that's so essential for everyday life in the country, help boost the infrastructure investment and increase our capacity in transport. One of the things that we note, Malcolm, is that if you look at the World Bank Logistics Performance Index, which is a way of measuring countries against each other, we were as high as 4th if you go back a decade ago, but that's dropped away quite significantly now, and we've dropped down to 19th. And we think there's a really big opportunity there to improve that, and planning and infrastructure investment is one way forward. The other, of course, is having a joint roadmap on decarbonisation. There's a lot of work being done in this area, but I think it needs to be more fully joined up to make sure that we really meet the imperative of decarbonising the industry. One area, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a bit more later on actually, is around skills and talent and working to publicise the sector and show the great careers that exist within the logistics industry. And so we've been working with the government now for about 18 months on a programme called Generation Logistics, which is jointly run by Logistics UK and the CILT. And that's amazing. And I'm sure we'll talk about it a bit more later on, but that's critically important. And then probably the final policy area will be we've got to make trade with overseas countries easier for our UK industry. And, there's some cautious steps being made in that direction, but, it's clear that that's one area that we're probably disadvantaged from where we were previously. But one of the overarching things that I think we realised, and we talked this through with some of the biggest companies in the UK in logistics, actually, both buyers and sellers, when we were together in January, was that when you look at logistics as a sector, it's dealt with in 8 different government departments. And what we've called for, and I'm really pleased to say that this has become a call across all the major trade associations now within the logistics area, is that we believe that there's a role for a dedicated UK government minister for logistics, probably sitting in the Cabinet Office, who's there to actually coordinate cross-departmentally and to make sure that these opportunities, which we think could be up to about 8 billion in GVA, can be taken. So I think we've got quite a radical set of requests that are steeped in the common sense of the industry, but could benefit the country as a whole. And so that's very much our big focus, given where we are at the moment. We're working more closely than we have with a number of other trade associations to try and bring these things to pass.
I mean, I think what you've said is fascinating and interesting, certainly to me. I mean, I think the starting point really is about sustainability. I think I've sort of crossed swords on the issue of decarbonisation. I think, yes, wherever possible, we should try and minimise emissions. But I think you can look at a zero-emission vehicle, but you can't look at a zero-emission cost of manufacture of a vehicle as an example. So I think for me, it's absolutely top of my list in terms of has been for a long time. I mean, I can go back to the early 2000s, sitting on an industry consultative committee for the CILT, responding to the Kyoto Summit Agreement and making key recommendations into government at that stage. I thoroughly agree with you that for an industry that's as important as logistics, it was a shock and surprise. And I really first sort of gathered this through talking to Claire Bartle of UCWA, that one sort of imagined that the Department for Transport covered everything, and it doesn't. It covers a fraction, and the government doesn't actually reflect the way that the industry actually works. And I've recently spoken to Richard from the RHA. I've done my second interview with him. He was the first interview that I did on Logistics Collective. What I'm really sort of sensing, this sort of gathering of industry bodies, is a really great initiative, because if the industry bodies can't collaborate and can't seek to influence, how does the industry seek to influence? So I really, really applauded that. I think that was fantastic. In terms of bringing people into this industry, for me, I found it forever fascinating. And quite simply, it's our life support system. and it isn't regarded in those terms. It's treated more as a utility. I mean, even a base utility like, you turn on a tap and water comes out. Well, okay, there's a whole load of industry and effort and care that needs to be taken with that. But the logistics industry is orders of magnitude more complex than that. In the same phrase, it's also robust but very fragile. And I think decision making poor decision making, let's say at governmental level, can really, really stymie the industry. And it's going to go through a whole number of challenges in terms of this journey to sustainability, because it doesn't just start of electrification of your vehicles. It's all about modal shift. I've always been fascinated as we sit on an island, why do we not make more use of intra-GB sea freight? And it's a tiny percentage of coastal shipping that we have now. I actually trialled, when I worked for Heinz, the use of feeder vessels just to see if it would work. And it did, and it was equal for cost at that time, but far less carbon. But the sort of transit time is about 3-4 hours too long for the retailer. And I shrugged my shoulders. I think that on occasions we've got this tremendous advantage of being an island and we don't leverage it.
I think you make an interesting point there. I mean, the coming together of trade associations on big points is something that myself, David Wells is CEO at Logistics UK, Richard, Claire, and there's actually 11 trade associations that got together, and we jointly wrote to the Prime Minister and all the other leaders around what we think are the priorities for the future. I think government is actually, from what I've seen, and I saw a little of this during COVID and Brexit when I was still working at DHL, and a bit more of it, I suppose, in the last 2 years since I've been at Logistics UK. Government is more open and listening more to the logistics sector than I think it ever has. And I think in a way, COVID was a bit of a dawning realization of some of the points that you made earlier on. And one of the things that we've got to do as an industry is not make it too complicated and too difficult to understand what the key messages are on the big areas. There's a wealth of smaller areas particularly around regulation that are really, really important in day-to-day operations. But for us to really move this conversation on, having a more joined up voice on the big issue, I think we regarded as really important. And that's why we started with that collaboration at the back end of last year.
And absolutely brilliant initiative. Wonderful. I mean, whatever colour of government we have in, if it's listening to this industry, I'm really happy and grateful as far as that is concerned. It certainly hasn't always been that way. So whatever your combined 11 trade associations are doing, it's obviously the right stuff. So, I just wanted to register my well done and give you, from my little world, absolute encouragement to continue with it. I think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, and I think we think so too. Really, I mean, we're not going to make it too complicated. It's not a new organisation or anything like that. It's people coming together with a common interest.
Certainly, and I think going back to the earlier point, you really focus on how do we get talent into the industry. I really got to say, this is the most fascinating industry.
Yeah.
It is a family of people within here. You meet so many different people. I certainly have during my career. Some of the new technology that is coming in, some of the challenges associated with that. I mean, when we're talking about decarbonisation, we perhaps are a bit vehicle focused, but then what we then are going to have to do is create all of the supporting systems behind the scenes that are actually going to be adapted for that, because the handling characteristics of, let's say, newer vehicles coming into this are going to be different, and so arguably the algorithms that you're using in the core of your systems might arguably be different as well.
Yeah, I think I was going to tell you a little story, actually, Malcolm. I was thinking about how to get this across about...
I absolutely love a little story, so you carry on. I am sitting comfortably and you can begin.
I'll try not to make it too long. I got into logistics straight out of university. There was a lecturer there called Jonathan Alien. I went to Salford, and he ran a transport economics course one year and an industrial economics course the next year, and I did both of them. And I'd never heard of logistics, didn't know what it was, never really crossed my mind. My mum ran factories, my mum's pharmacies, works as a pharmacist, and so my work experience, if you like, was quite narrow. And he planted the seed of saying, well, why don't you look at this? Why don't you go and look at this industry? And he knew about it. Yeah, obviously he knew a lot more about it than I did. And I remember going and applying for what was the NFC management scheme. You'll remember that from donkeys ago. And I would never have done that if he hadn't have planted that seed. And so at the moment, as we're running with Generation Logistics, which is, say, a campaign, 50 odd sponsors, including 11 trade associations and companies across the industry, as well as the Department for Transport. So it's jointly run by CILT Logistics UK, and the Department for Transport supply about a third of the funding. And what we realised is we can make a big impression upon a young audience through a social media campaign. And we've been doing that for 18 months. And it's been really, really successful. But we also have to go back up into education as well, because if teachers know a bit about logistics, and generally at the moment they don't, then it's more likely that it might trigger interest in other people as well. Because ultimately, young people in particular, they take their career advice from a combination of family, social media, teachers and careers advisors as well. And so what we're doing at the moment, and it's really interesting to see the uptake on it, is we're creating lessons in maths, in geography, business studies, and computing with a logistics theme behind the lesson. And we're creating them then as free to download lessons for teachers to then use when they're teaching those subjects. We've created the first ever careers guide with 14 different job families, everything from the physical roles, driving and warehousing, to all the support roles, including solution design and consultancy and IT and finance and HR, international trade. And we've created a careers guide for schools and colleges. Believe it or not, there's never been one for the logistics industry. Never been one. Couldn't believe it.
It's incredible to note. I mean, I'm going to make a little plea here, and it's a plea for the health and good and mental well-being of the logistics industry as a whole. The one thing I didn't hear there was, how do we teach people how to buy logistics? Because I think that's a big question. Because in terms of our own activities with Laguru, we really work on both sides of that. I won't call it it's not a divide, it's both sides of the table. And it's utterly fascinating for me as being a buyer of logistics. And the reason that I did that, it was the period of maximum change, maximum opportunity, but maximum risk as well. There's a peril in getting your buying processes wrong and making the wrong calls. And for me, it's it always is looking, and I've had a chance to see what everybody else does. And I will be kind and say it's a very variable quality. And it's a really important thing for a business to buy correctly.
Yeah, I think so. And I know you've made this journey a little bit yourself, and perhaps it's one of the attractions of working in the logistics sector. But there are so many different roles that you can play, and having experience of playing a number of those roles makes you much, much more effective as you make that sort of diversification through your career.
100% agree with that, Phil.
I think working as an operator, working as a buyer, working as a consultant as well, I think, certainly in the management roles in logistics, I think are hugely complementary to one another. But I think what we've done with the Generation Logistics campaign is we realise that what young people want to hear, they don't want to hear from the likes of you and me, really. They want to hear from real people within around 7 to 10 years of their own age, talking about their real experience and their real jobs and what they've liked and what's been difficult for them. And so we're up to just under 200 case studies now of people working across the industry in a whole variety of different roles, talking about their jobs, what they like, what they don't like, real passion, working for all different companies, all different modes, both sides of the buying and selling area as well. It's those case studies that actually we're using to create curiosity. If we can create curiosity, then things can come from that. And fundamentally, the industry is growing. the industry is growing throughout the country. It's one of the very few industries that are growing everywhere because the logistics content of consumption is going up over time. And so there's more logistics work going on throughout the UK. So, yeah, the DFT have been brilliant with this. The sponsors have been fantastic. All sorts of different companies, big international companies, local hauliers, consultancies, IT businesses, the big infrastructure providers, so Network Rail and as well. We've been lucky, Malcolm. We've created our careers out of the variety that's available in this industry, and I think it's only right that we try and help people also find their way forward in the industry if it's for them. And it may not be for them, but let's not lose sight of the fact that if people don't know about it, go back to my story. If Jonathan Aylan hadn't talked about it, I'd have never looked at the NFC brochure, I don't think. And so our focus at the moment is on helping careers advisors and helping teachers, as well as talking directly to young people through social media. We've created lessons for GCSE years as well, and games as well for the younger years. And, I feel very passionate about this. I think as an industry, we need it, but I think it's great to be able to enable people to make the best of their careers and their lives as they go forward.
Absolutely. Clearly, you've done your research, and the relatability can be age-related. But having said that, your own story of somebody that started as a student and then went on to some of the most senior roles in the largest logistics service provider in the world, that is quite a story. And you've covered something of your journey, but what are the sort of key memories that stick in your mind, both in terms of successes and challenges that really shaped your journey? What can you remember?
Although it's a long time ago, it feels like everything was in black and white at the time, but I do remember my first training program that I went through. There were 64 graduate trainees the year I joined at 87, and it was a brilliant program of introduction both to work, but also to the disciplines of working in the distribution industry. It was then. It wasn't really called logistics. And I still, every now and then, I think back on some of those things that we were trained in, and I still use them. I think that would be the first thing. I think I remember going the first time I went to run a site, which was for Sainsbury's, doing their beers, wines and spirits, which is a cracking job, Malcolm, I have to say. And I called it my growing up job because I don't think I realised what I needed to do and what I didn't know.
Did you say growing up or brewing up?
Yes, growing up. Definitely a growing up job.
Okay, just to clear that up.
Yeah. I'd be 25, I think, at the time. And, you think you're on some accelerated path, which is, I think people were encouraged to think like that at the time. And I stayed running those sites, a couple of sites for about 4 years. And that was really, really important, particularly about how to work with people. Fundamentally, this is a people industry. Yes, there's lots of technology and automation, and there's an increasing amount of sophistication, particularly in the establishment of logistics operations. But the heartbeat of any logistics operation is the people that work within them. And so being able to be credible, honest, is really, really important if you want to work in this industry, and particularly if you want to lead other people. And I think that probably that job more than any is the one that taught me a lot. Some painful stuff actually in there as well, but you have to go through that in order to learn. I guess I'd worked in operations for about 10, 12 years, and I wanted to do something different. And I moved into working with customers at the time. This was when I was at TDG. You'll remember that, the juggler. Working with customers on looking to create new ways of working or new products if required, and then from that into sales and marketing and strategy over the course of about 4 or 5 years, and that was remarkable. I remember the biggest thing was you come out of operations where everything is in a routine. Your routine. You know what your routines are, whether it's in the day or in the week or across the month or even across the year. And then you go into a sales environment where you've got peaks of activity, and then you've got different quieter periods, and it was such a massive change. And I really enjoyed it. I think that was during that period was when we first met, actually, up in up in Wigan. And I really enjoyed that change. But then I wanted to get back to running businesses, and so I went back and did that for another 10 years. And then I moved back to Excel, and then DHL bought Excel in 2005. And from there, I think the opportunities and the environment really changed because there were so many different things that you could do. And, I love variety. I am fascinated by this industry, and I like business as well. So for me, that was just marvelous. I mean, and I spent some time working internationally with some of our customers, going into new markets, as well as running the businesses and working with a couple of very, very close friends and colleagues to create transport strategy for DHL. And so there's, it's strange when you look back on it now. It's such a long period of time. There's only bits of it that you can immediately recall. But perhaps my overwhelming feeling is that despite the challenges, despite the tests of your personal resilience, which this industry does quite frequently, I think, place upon its people, my overwhelming feeling is of gratefulness, really, for all the people that helped me through my career, for all the variety that existed, and for all the companies that I worked with.
I'd certainly echo that. I definitely echo the challenges are what shape you, and some of the mistakes that are made. They are your best learning lessons within it, because what you do is that you refine your processes and your approach as a result of the learnings that you have within them. And have I been sat in the middle of a warehouse when, shall we say, perhaps an implementation has gone wrong, and it's basically roll your sleeves up, and you've then got to begin to deal with the noise and plan in a difficult environment your recovery out of that. And you learn an awful lot in terms of that. And that's certainly shaped my knowledge and experience of, I now know what to do, and I'm very clear in terms of what I don't do. And I'd also echo your thoughts in terms of, I've had a whole series of people within my career that have given me chances to do incredible stuff. And I didn't think even, that I would be going, to the Houses of Parliament, that I would be going to the European Commission, that I would be leading a group of 25 FMCGs in Europe trying to look at collaborative logistics. I didn't think I was going to be doing anything like that. And so the view that I take of the industry is that it offers huge opportunity for anybody coming into it. And take that from, an aged person like me, I would want to try and relate very clearly to somebody that's starting their career, that this is an industry that is most certainly worth scratching beneath the surface and finding out a little bit more about, because it's an area of white hot really change and investment and new technologies, and I actually think the best is yet to come.
Yeah, I'm people I've worked with over the years. We've had this conversation quite a bit about describing logistics as a team sport, really, almost like the ultimate team sport, I think, because you achieve nothing on your own, and that I think that's true really in all areas of working in logistics. So if you like problem solving and working with people, and if you're curious, it's a great place to be for all people, irrespective of things like educational background. It's becoming increasingly diverse. Well, it's interesting, actually, go back to our case studies for Generation Logistics, that we've got a significant chunk of those. I think just under 40% of our case studies are from women working in logistics, and about 20% of it is people from the BAME community as well. So what we're trying to do is show that there is something for everybody within the industry.
And that's noble. And some of the best operational leaders that I had exposure to during my career were women. And I would say that we've got to have a diverse mindset to find the talent to come into the industry and make it a very comfortable place for people to land and grow.
Yeah, I think we're one of the things that I think is changing. I think it's changing slowly, but it is changing. One of the bits of feedback we got from young people was that you needed a degree in logistics to understand a job advert in logistics. The way you read the advert, you had to know something about it, and it therefore put up an immediate barrier. if you weren't already working in the industry. And I think if we're going to win this battle for talent, because I think most industries are in similar kind of battle as well, really, then we've got to be the place where you go to get the experience, not the place where you have to have the experience before you can arrive. And I think, I mean, you've probably seen it as well, Malcolm, but I think over the last few years, seen a massive change in how many organisations in the sector are recruiting, training, and encouraging and looking after their young people. And, you know, it's great to see that. And we're going to need to keep doing more and more of that, I think, if we're to be successful and get the talent that we need going forward.
It's sort of an interesting perspective. I've had a balanced career of working for a combination of FMCGs and also logistics businesses, both small and large. But I remember during the 1990s, during joining Tibbetts & Britton at the time, which eventually was subsumed into XL and therefore DHL. And my comment about that was that was an incredible change for me, and the business really did look and care about me being educated. And there was an immense push in terms of learning new skills and learning about the industry back then. And frankly, that hasn't been repeated in some of the largest scale FMCGs that I've worked with since. It's there is a sort of view that, there are some learning experiences. Heinz was brilliant for giving you working opportunities to go and learn with quite a bit of support and latitude to do that. And I much appreciated at the time the latitude to innovate and try new things. But then thereon after, it was you have the knowledge squeezed into your head, you're processing it, and thereon after, the forward roles of that were, oh, well, you sort of know what you're doing now, so you don't need so much in the way of development. I was smiled wryly at that. So whilst perhaps the logistics industry, and I can only speak from personal experience, it may well have had a poorer rap, my experience of it was truly very, very positive indeed. So thinking about really the sort of immediate now and then going into perhaps the next sort of 5-6 years, what do you think are the biggest challenges for the industry?
Well, I think they kind of go back to some of the things I started the interview with, really. When you look at where we are at the moment, there is a big opportunity to improve efficiency and productivity. There's a big opportunity to decarbonise. There's a big opportunity to continue to create great careers for people in a broad area with massive variety of different roles, I guess, across the industry. And I think bringing those areas together in a cohesive way, working with local government, national government, devolved government, is the really big challenge, because fundamentally, if we improve the logistics industry through those different areas that I've just described, we're going to improve the UK economy. We're going to make the UK economy more efficient. We're going to improve service and cost performance for the UK as we go forward. So I think that's probably the macro picture, Malcolm, of where there are opportunities. I think within the micro picture, actually, if you take that back perhaps to individual organisations, then, I mean, clearly at the moment there is a very severe pressure, financial pressure on particularly the transport industry. I mean, we've had horrendous numbers of businesses go to the wall over the course of the last year. Hopefully we're coming out of now, but we've been in a period where the physical economy, I think, has declined much more than perhaps the financial numbers say, and so there's much lower activity. I think out of that creates opportunity for greater collaboration. And I do agree with your comment earlier on that it's not just about changing the technology for decarbonisation, it's also about reducing waste and empty running. And I think there is an opportunity in those areas. And I think also there are a whole load of other technology opportunities that the industry is starting to take. And actually there's some wonderful examples of this that, my newish role I've managed to go around and see. And so I guess at both the macro and the micro level, what I see is opportunity. Yeah. People need logistics more than they ever had. And I think there is more recognition of the industry as a result. So that, I think, gives cause for optimism as well. I think what we've got to do is to help organisations tread that improvement path, if you like, whether that's a micro level or a macro level, so that we can improve the UK as we go forward, and in doing so, improve the lot for the people within the industry as well. I guess that's a very broad answer, but I think it probably reflects where we are at the moment.
It's a very broad industry, and you'd expect it to be a broad answer, to be fair. And it's a good answer. I would begin to, sort of stretch out to the future and say, well, I think there are a number of things that are on the table that could prove very, very interesting. So everybody is talking about AI, and I started looking at machine learning and AI 16 years ago. So it's not the white heat of the moment in reality. It's just been sitting in the background, and we're trying to figure out what to do with it. And I think some of the use cases now, I think, are a little bit prosaic. And what I think we need to do as an industry is to develop what I would call the rich and superhuman questions that really challenge it. So how can we actually coordinate our network of networks better in order to be able to improve load fill, in order to be able to cope with new vehicles and new methods of powering vehicles? Can we offer customers, for example, services that are based on, well, this could be more sustainable, and are you interested? Because I think an awful lot of what we do is, we will have it to you, one press of a button, and we'll get it to you very, very quickly. And that's great. But is it when I really need it? And there might be some products that I do need immediately. But a lot of the time, actually, accuracy and precision of delivery point and flexibility to be able to choose that is better than speed. And so when you begin to look at, let's say, the numbers as far as empty running, but also load fill, that's the other part that people often miss. I think we miss a trick within that we're going to have to apply some considerable smarts to get that in there. But I think that's a tremendous opportunity for the logistics service providers, certainly those of scale, to really begin to leverage their network.
Yeah.
And of course, we're doing some work in that area.
Part of some of the things I've become involved in since over the last couple of years, I'm working with the Digital Catapult. This is not with Logistics UK, it's under my own bat, really. Working on a program which is looking at exactly those things about how to foster collaboration and how to create digital tools to help people be able to collaborate. And it is really interesting. I mean, it is really, really interesting because I don't think the ideas are particularly new. Well, they're not new, really. But the capabilities are increasingly growing to be able to support decision-making, particularly in transport, in a much more speedy way and much more in keeping with actually how the industry works. And it's going to be really interesting to see how that develops. But yeah, I do agree with you. There's lots of exciting things that I think that are starting to happen. But I guess the principles then that underlie what makes really good solutions are still pretty much the same, really. Fundamentally, we have to chase waste out of the supply chain.
It is interesting, Phil, in the first stages of sustainability, when you're actually looking at it, that actually is just following common sense of becoming more efficient. And becoming more efficient increases the value proposition of the industry and increases profitability. So if you're saying what I think is one of the largest challenges for the industry at the moment, and I say this from a position of, a former buyer of maybe some reputation, whether that's good, bad, or indifferent. But my concern at the moment is that I don't think logistics providers are making enough profit.
Yeah.
And that's partially reflected by the 480 or so distribution businesses that have gone to the wall last year. And speaking to Richard of the RHA only a week and a half ago, it's running at 150 in quarter one and likely to hit 600 by the end of the year, which is an absolute crying shame. But for me, it is this pursuit of efficiency also is, and sustainability is also about pursuit of profit. And I think people that are buying logistics have got to understand that the industry is going through a big challenge and a big amount of change, and actually it needs the money to invest.
It does. And I do also understand that when you've got an economy, this is why we need growth in the economy. Yeah. All of these things become easier with an economy that's got growth within it, and we haven't had any growth in the economy for a long time.
There is a reverse perspective to that, in my experience, Philip, I might say, is that quite often a tough economy should lead us to becoming leaner and more efficient as a result of it. I think the other part of that is when we're looking at it is interesting to look at the reasons why businesses actually do fail. And some of it will be related to, for sure, challenges as far as rates are concerned. But quite a bit will be related to cash flow. And I'm sort of fascinated, you've got a low profitability industry with payment terms that are stretched. And that for smaller businesses, having now run a small business with reasonable level of success over the last 6 years, has brought it absolutely home to me that cash is king.
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly times become tighter. That's absolutely the case. I mean, I kind of agree with your point about the leaner through difficult times. Of course, the problem with that is that then you do get casualties in that, and that's what we're seeing at the moment. And that's really not good, because ultimately the UK economy needs a vibrant logistics sector, and the logistics sector needs a vibrant road transport sector, in order to actually be able to support the rest of the economy. So, yeah, it is a real concern at the minute.
My other future interest at the moment is digital product passports and where that could potentially take us. I'm utterly fascinated and working quite heavily at the moment in terms of trying to imagine where that is going to take us. And I think the ability to have easier access to information on individual units of product during its lifetime can bring a whole new range of opportunities. It isn't just it's an automated barcode, who gives a damn. It is everything else that you can actually do with it.
It's what becomes really interested in when you look at consumer choice over decarbonisation, because where you've got digital product passports, then you can take more characteristic information through the supply chain as well, and how consumers then react with better information, I think is a key factor really in looking at how decarbonisation works. I think the other thing that goes with it, though, is that fundamentally we're a trading nation. So to make those kind of approaches work, we have to be able to work collaboratively and internationally to make sure that the standards that we put in place work. So it's really important that we're not trying to create something that's just for the UK.
100% agree.
Yeah.
And again, lubricating trade friction is important. And we have a really interesting technology partner that's utilising AI in order to be able to speed through customs processing, and utterly fascinated in terms of where they are at that point in time. It was a little bit post-Brexit. It reminded me of the early part of my career during the late 80s and into the early 90s, prior to establishment of a single market. And, it didn't appear to embrace particularly the digital world to easily solve the problems. And it is good to see that people are thinking in that space.
Yeah, I think so. I think, ultimately the digital solutions now that are available, they change the game. They change how you can manage processes that have been largely unchanged for a long, long time, particularly on international trade. And actually, the digital catapult has got some projects that are running in those areas at the moment. I'm not directly involved in them myself, but listening to how they work and what their ambition is, it gives you real cause for optimism, because fundamentally we want, particularly our manufacturing businesses in the UK, to be as competitive as they can be. And we know that most manufacturing, but not all, but a large percentage of manufacturing businesses, if they're setting up in the UK, they're going to need some form of export market to create the volume they need.
Thanks, Phil. And now, look, we've got to my final question. And my final question is, how optimistic are you for the future of the logistics industry in the UK?
Yeah, I'm really optimistic. And And that's based really, I think, on a couple of things. I'm really optimistic because I believe that the importance of the logistics industry is being understood to a greater degree by more people. That isn't to say that I'm in any way complacent that particular journey is run, because it isn't. But I think if you compare it to where we were 5 or 6 years ago, then I think it is in a very different situation. And I think what that means is that the ideas and the opportunities that we're identifying across the logistics sector will get a better hearing, and we'll be able to work even more closely than we do. And we already work very closely, I have to say, with lots of different government departments. But actually, the ability of the industry to be able to express what are the key issues, I think, has also improved as well. So I think there will be growth in the industry. There's bound to be bumps in the road of activity levels, and we've certainly been seeing that over the last year. And finally, I think if we continue to collaborate the way that we are now to show to people how attractive it is to come work in the industry, then I think that gives us cause for optimism about the next generations of people that are going to come into the industry and carry on delivering for their customers, carry on driving improvement in supply chains, creating service, supporting the essential services that we have in the country as well. So I think there's a lot to be positive about. As ever, there's always a lot of short-term challenges, and we definitely feel like we've been in that position now for a few years actually. But I think with all the things that we could do, if we can get those properly deployed, then I think the future for the logistics industry is very strong.
Thank you for saying so, Phil. And certainly we've heard it from one of the leading lights of the industry, somebody that I respect hugely. And so that's a thank you for investing your time really within this. But yes, the logistics industry is challenging. It has a great future. It is increasing its pace of investment in technology and new ideas, and it's got the challenge of becoming ever more sustainable. What's not to like? And I'm always going to big up the industry. In the past, I would say that perhaps sitting there as on occasions judge and jury as a buyer, people may not have believed it, but I do care very much about the industry, and even more so now. I want to give you a final opportunity, Phil. If you've got one question you'd like to ask me, because I've asked you loads of questions.
I think the big question that, you and I have talked about this over the years many, many, many times, but I think one of the big prizes that is there is to crack transport collaboration to reduce empty running. I was talking the other day with Alan McKinnon, and you look at the numbers and they stubbornly remained the same. In fact, got slightly worse by all accounts in terms of empty running over the last 3 or 4 years. You've looked at this a few times, Malcolm. What would you do to overcome this problem?
Now, that is not going to take a moment to answer, but I will give you some headlines in terms of what I see. Some of it is on the basis of, I call it Pavlovian logistics. And so this relates to Pavlov's dogs rather than anything else. I think we're very process oriented, and we don't sometimes step back and have a real think about what it is that we're doing. So for instance, any large scale logistics service provider will probably receive hundreds of tender documents every week or month, and they're going to triage them, they're going to look at them, they're going to actually say, well, what looks attractive? The ones that they're not interested in, they will put to one side, and the ones that they are interested in but don't win, they'll also put that to one side. At no point will they go back and perhaps reflect on the business that they have at the moment and the fit of the new piece of business with the existing business that they have. And nor will they use the big data and And perhaps, there might be restrictions in terms of confidentiality, maybe. And so NDAs maybe work against us in this circumstance. But they're getting literally bucket loads of distribution information, and it goes and there's nothing that happens with it. And so for me, a lot comes from my perspective about how we buy, how we sell, and are we really using all of the data around us in an appropriately intelligent way? Or are we actually managing by rote and getting excited about winning a new prize, but not actually looking behind us and saying, well, what impact does that have? Now, in that sense, the logistics service providers could become the utter heroes. When they understand the network balance, they can perhaps be more proactive. And I often tell the story that, I had a 350 million a year logistics category to look after. And I only ever had one proactive approach in that period of time. And then I would hear some chomping of teeth when I'd be talking, I'd be in a tender environment because people would want to come and have a more value-added discussion. But the reality is the value-added discussion always needed to happen before. And the truth of the matter is that if you do this and you build this, big network model, and you then have something that looks a little bit like contract lifecycle management lying behind it, you begin to be able to target better. And when you truly understand your networks as a whole, you can then perhaps begin to form strategic alliances. Well, could co-opetition work? Well, what are the examples, let's say, that might be related? And I would just go and have a look at the airline alliances. So things like SkyTeam, One World, Star Alliance. And what they do is that they do a variety of collaborations regularly to build networks across businesses in order to be able to take people across the world in the most efficient and profitable way that they can. And I guess my surprise is that we're not seeing so much of that in the logistics industry. And I would love the opportunity to promote more of that. And I'll go further and say we're doing some very, very deep thinking on that at this point in time.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely a big prize, isn't it? It's there to be claimed. It's interesting with the digital catapult that what they're trying to do is create software to support that process.
Yeah, the truth of the matter, Phil, with my work with Elupeg, we got to the stage of having this software available over 20 years ago. And the trouble comes is that the job is hard enough to operate within the silo. And it is difficult to get people to come out of those silos and to actually think in a more connected way. And some of it is the technology has been around a long time that could handle the complexity of looking at something like this. Truly it has. Even going back to the early 2000s, the combinatorial tech that I was working with within Heinz, I mean, the way that felt is that I had the fastest Ferrari you could imagine, and I was driving it around town at 20 miles an hour. We had so not, even at that stage, got into it. We now have even more powerful methods of and smarter methods of analysis. And I go back to my earlier question is, are we asking the superhuman questions? Because if we don't ask those questions, we're never going to get to the answer. The superhuman question would be addressing behavior and actually turning around and saying, well, okay, this is beneficial for you in terms of your own profitability, but it is able, rather than some aspects of greenwashing, you can really tell a great story as far as sustainability. Now, that might be unrealistic, but if we don't look and we don't try, we'll never get.
Yeah, no, really good. See, I think we've just confirmed in our conversation with one another what you and I have both known for a long time is that we're fascinated by this industry. Yeah.
Absolutely. There is always, we look at it, and I am not demeaning or meaning to anybody that's working within this industry doing a damn difficult job on a day-by-day basis. But what I'm looking for the future of the industry is that it has to be more profitable to invest for the future. And it has, in my view, need to take a new approach in the way that it gets business, it looks at its balance of business within those organizations, and it may well seek to trade. In my mind, I always find tendering quite ridiculous because, in theory, from a buyer's perspective, you get smart, you get everything clean-ish in terms of your data and your requirement once every, say, 5 years. Well, in theory, most large-scale businesses should have reasonable control of their data and could build what I would describe as a forever tender. So it's almost that it's live and we can actually see the changes going on. And these are the, people might look at me and say, well, okay, are you crazy? And maybe I am. But looking at things in that different way just might get us to a position whereby we can do the impossible, which is become incredibly sustainable, ever more technological, have a great story to tell as far as people are concerned, and actually make more money that allows us to invest back into it. That would be my dream. So, Phil, thank you ever so much for agreeing to do this. It's really appreciated.
Really good to catch up after all this time as well, Michael.
Maybe we'll have something else to talk about in the future as well.
Good.
It's my first with Logistics UK. I'm on my second with the RHA, and I probably need to give Claire Bottle a call in the near future and see what Aqua is doing and see who else wants to actually talk with us. We're now getting to the stage of thousands of listens on each of our episodes, and we've got an international audience, which is great. So again, thanks, Phil. To the listener, if you're interested in finding out more about the Logistics Collective, please go to our website on www.logisticscollective.com. If you want reminders about when our latest podcasts are coming out, please like and follow us on your podcast platforms. We're across about 7 different platforms at the moment, including Spotify, Google, Apple, and we also publish out on YouTube as well for those that like that. So again, thanks for listening, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
You can get in contact by email, podcast@logisticscollective.com, or leave a voice message on our website, logisticscollective.com. The podcast is a production by LaGuru.